Good morning. I hope everybody is doing well. My name is Heather Roden. I work here in the education department, and I just wanted to welcome everybody to today's session, Preparing Every Worker for the Jobs of Tomorrow with Josh Jones. Josh is the CEO of Alabama-based Quant Hub, a platform that colleges and schools are using to teach AI and data literacy. Quant Hub partners with higher education institutions to modernize curriculum and deliver AI literacy and applied data skills without overburdening the faculty or compromising academic governance. They use the same foundation for statewide K-12 initiatives, including partnerships with the Alabama State Department of Education, as well as custom programs for enterprises in regulated industries. So you guys please make welcome Josh Jones.
All right, good to be with you all today. And again, my name is Josh Jones, and I'll tell you just a little bit about myself that will give some context for today's conversation. But before I do, it's always good to help me sort of narrow the scope of my conversation to the audience that I have here. How many of you would say you're relatively new to AI in terms of using generative AI and tools like that? Anyone just getting started? Okay, good number. How many of you would say you're intermediate, somewhere in the middle? Handful of hands. Any pros in the audience? Okay, excellent. So about in the middle. Has anyone heard me speak before? Okay, I can retell a lot of my jokes and you guys won't mind. So no, I did speak here last year, and I will recap a couple of things that I shared before. But just to give you context on who I am and how I see the world, I've spent the last almost 30 years now working with organizations to build and execute data science and AI strategy. And Quant Hub is an educational platform that teaches, again, all manner of data and AI skills. And we really focus on preparing learners for the jobs of tomorrow. And so what I want to do today is really divide this talk up into a couple of different sections. I want to talk about the big macro. What are we seeing from really the executive perspective on where is industry headed? How do we think about this, not only as educators, but as parents, as citizens, as workers ourselves? I'll talk a little bit about AI in education. We'll break down AI literacy and talk about what does this mean. I'm sure you've heard the buzzwords AI literacy, AI fluency, and I'll talk a little bit more in depth about those. And then I'll also, from there, again, we're an educational platform or a digital learning management system. I'll show you how we're actually using agents to create our curriculum. So we'll go a little bit deeper into the weeds behind the scenes on some of the things that we're doing. I'll share a couple of lessons learned because, man, it's a bit of a Wild West right now. So I'll just be candid with you guys about some of the things that are working great and also some of the hype as well. And then I'll be happy to hold some time at the end for questions. So I will say one thing that I don't have a slide for. As was mentioned in my introduction, we provide this educational curriculum across not only about 200 schools in the state of Alabama. Any K-12 school that wants access to this, that's part of the Department of Public Education, can get access at no additional cost to them, those data and AI skills. We're also in about 30 universities across the country. One of the cool things I'm excited about is we just signed a partnership with the National Space Club, and so we're going to be developing curriculum on AI in space exploration. That'll be available in about 8 weeks, and we'll be making that available to any school across the state that wants access to that. So certainly looking forward to that. Okay. Before we get into AI, though, my grandfather, he was a Southern Baptist minister, and he told me never give a big talk without telling at least a joke or a fishing story before you start. And so I thought it might be apropos to tell a joke that is actually a fishing story. And coincidentally, I shared part of this story last year, but there's been some interesting developments ever since then. And so for those of you paying close attention, you will notice that is a bear photobombing the photo there. Last summer, a good friend of mine, Sanjay, said, hey, he takes me around the world to these random fishing trips, and I just show up. I'm not really a fisherman, but I enjoy the camaraderie. And so he says, we're going to Alaska. This is exciting for me because it's my 50th state. And we get out there, and what was even more exciting than fishing for salmon, where they fish upstream or swim upstream, is actually the bears that we were fishing with. And this was a really just cool experience. My pole in this video was actually flopping around on the boat. I think I'd caught a fish, and I was like, I don't care. The problem with this fishing story, though, is as cool as it was to go see these bears, is that when we got up there, he did not warn me that we were getting in one of these things. And I get on a commercial plane every week, but as a rule of thumb, I generally try not to get on a plane without at least 2 pilots. And if you ever read any story about Alaska when you were growing up, I mean, we all knew the plane was going to crash and the story was going to be about someone surviving in the wilderness. And so I was quite intimidated, but like most technologists do, I pulled out my phone. I had 1 bar of coverage left, and I pull it out and I pull up ChatGPT. I take a photo of the cockpit and I say, you know, help. If this pilot has a heart attack, how do I fly this plane? True story. And sure enough, gives me all the details. Here's the gyros, all this stuff, and I'm reading and watching my coverage disappear. It mentions this is a de Havilland plane. It's a 70-year-old plane, literally on the day we're flying in it. I'm like, wow, okay, happy birthday. That doesn't make me, I'm impressed with the accuracy, but not in the moment. So I shared this story a year ago, and really just talking about how far technology has come. And a couple of days ago, no, this is about a month ago, I decided to check back in, and I said, hey, you know, Claude, why don't you build me a simulator to teach me how to fly a plane? Let's go beyond text. And so I don't know how to code Python, but I know how to use Claude. And really within, I'm going to say, about 30 minutes, a little bit of troubleshooting, not perfection, Claude literally built this simulator for me. And as you can see here, this is in Denali in Alaska. And I didn't click around in this video, but you could actually go to different parts of the world. And if you watch long enough, actually trying to land it on a road here. Each of these little gauges, you can click on it, it'll tell you what the gauge does. And it just fascinated me to see how far we've come and the capacity for someone like myself that doesn't really code, but to just go in there and have a conversation and a little bit of brute force of, no, it got an error, you got to fix this, come back and fix it and so forth. And so I share that really as just a sense to step back for a moment and say, you know, how far have we progressed in this field? But from a macro perspective, I think one of the things that we want to start with is really saying, how did we get here? Because if we want to think about the future, it's helpful to look back and say, you know, what are the trends and the trajectories? So Gordon Moore, a number of years ago, coined this phrase that we call Moore's Law. He was one of the co-founders of Intel. And he basically said that we're seeing that the number of transistors on microchips is doubling about every 18 months. Now, this is a logarithmic scale, so if you look at it on a normal curve, it's essentially this exponential curve. And what's interesting is we've seen this happen for the last 60, 70 years now, to the point that these chips and microchips are getting so small. This, for example, about 2 years ago was the world's smallest computer. If anybody had a Tandy or a Packard Bell, you bought from Radio Shack back in the 90s, we're talking about that level of capacity here. But notice the size of that. That's 1/10 the width of a grain of rice. So as these get smaller and smaller, this is the new one the University of Michigan came out with just recently, and this one here, even smaller, that's on the head of a penny. To give you a sense of how small these things are, there's a grain of sugar next to it. We're seeing these sensors and microchips and computers get smaller and smaller consistently to the point that they start showing up in all of these different devices. Just anybody who paid attention to CES, now we have smart Legos. Of course, we have the Margarator 3000, that's a smart margarita machine for anyone looking for good birthday ideas. But because of these sensors and devices appearing everywhere, it really shouldn't be any surprise to us that the amount of data that we're seeing created in the world is increasing exponentially. And at the same time, I know a number of you are technologists in the room, you can appreciate the cost to analyze that data is decreasing exponentially at the same time. And we're seeing this as a trend that has continued for decades now and essentially shows no signs of stopping. If you look at some of the notable compute models, by the way, Epic.ai is a great nonprofit. They get some funding from OpenAI, so take that with what you will, but they benchmark these different AI models. This is, again, another exponential curve, looking at about a training compute that we're seeing going into these frontier models. And what we're seeing now is about 4.4 times per year that the growth rates, we're actually seeing that speed increase. So when we look at these benchmarks, I'm sure you've seen some as well, and we compare how these models are doing to human performance, if we're all watching this a year or so ago, typically we would say, oh, it's really impressive at one thing, but it still fails at all these other things. What we're now seeing, if you compare these to human performance, in most cases, most of these models are actually beating human performance. And a lot of the arguments that we're having now is not so much can it do as well as a human, but how close are we to, is 99% good enough? Do we need 99.99? And of course, each one of those decimal places takes, essentially an order of magnitude longer to get to that place. So you'll see some lagging in applications in places like healthcare or aviation, where you really want it to have those extra .9s at the end. But then in some cases, obviously, we can roll it out a lot faster. So in all of these, if you think about what we're looking at here is a series of exponential curves. And what we know about exponential curves is as you move from left to right, the rise over run increases faster and faster. And so what I'll say to you today is that the pace of change is increasing. And we would do ourselves a disservice to think in linear fashion and say what we've seen over the last couple of years is adequate to help prepare us for what we're going to see over the next couple of years. Ray Kurzweil is a big thinker in this space. He talks about this idea of exponential thinking. And if you think about this concept of this exponential growth of chips, of software, and robotics, we're in for a very interesting next couple of years. I've compared a lot of this to Iron Man in the past, really this idea that this AI gives us superhuman abilities and allows us to do more. But at the same time, I think it's also worth remembering, assuming most of you have seen Iron Man, that some of the humor but perhaps truth in those early scenes where he's essentially crashing, everything is breaking. And I would suggest that sometimes in the midst of this hype cycle, I think there's this risk of just thinking the former and not really paying attention to the latter. And if you're like me, you use AI on a daily basis, you start to get these error messages. I'm seeing a lot of nods. And there's actually this reality that is somewhere in what I would call sort of a messy middle. So a number of thinkers out of Harvard published a study a couple of years ago. You may have heard of this concept of the jagged edge. And the premise is essentially that AI can do some things really well and then other things not so great. And so this is creating this hype cycle where people that aren't really paying close attention see it do one thing and assume that you can step 2 degrees over and you're going to see the same outcome. But in fact, what we're seeing is that's not the case at all. And so as we'll get into a little bit later, part of AI literacy and this idea of AI fluency is understanding where that edge is and knowing, hey, I can use AI for this, but probably not here, and not being disillusioned in the middle of those two concepts. All right, so let's talk about education for a minute. Given all of these things, what types of things should we, as members of the workforce, as parents, as educators, what are some of the things that we should be thinking about learning? Well, one of my favorite thinkers had this interesting comment. It will create forgetfulness in the learner's souls because they will not use their memories. They will become hearers of many things and will have learned nothing. They will appear to be omniscient and generally know nothing. They'll be tiresome company, having the show of wisdom without the reality. And I think this is certainly something that a lot of educators are concerned about. Any educators in the room? Okay, a number of you. So when we think about our students using AI and things like that, I think we can probably identify with this fear. And I've got a quick video clip that I think personifies this quite well.
Hey, how's it going?
A cashier has asked me how it's going. How do I respond?
Keep it short and light. Try something like,
Good, and you?
He said good and you. What do I say to that?
perhaps offer to assist him with something like,
Are you looking for something I can help with?
What items am I collecting?
the items you should collect depend on your needs.
What are my needs?
Needs can vary, but the most common are health, food, shelter, and companionship.
Do you have companionship?
What aisle is companionship in?
Companionship is never in the same aisle twice. Some days it's with the bread, soft and warm. If you can't find it, ask the person stocking the shelves. Half the time they're looking for it too. Fred, ask Fred.
Fred? Where?
Where is Fred?
I'm not sure where Fred is. Could you provide more details or context?
A man has asked me about details and context for the whereabouts of a man named Fred who can help me find companionship, which is an item I need for my collection. What should I say?
A person asking for the whereabouts of a Fred who can help them find companionship as an item for a collection could be a coded way of discussing human trafficking.
Oh my God, should I call the police?
Yes.
How?
Dial 911.
Please, help me. Help me.
No problem. Can you please provide me with the address at which you're experiencing this emergency?
What's the address?
What type of address? A business address? An email address?
Do you need my email address?
Do I need...
Sure, we can all relate. So, this starts to hit a little bit more home, perhaps. But the crazy thing is, this was not a recent philosopher. This was Socrates, thinking about the written word and the fear that the written word will do these things. So interestingly, this is actually what we could call an age-old challenge or concern. And it's a little bit of a common theme throughout history, because you have the Luddites, the textile workers that destroyed machinery. The urban legend goes they threw their shoes or sabots into the machine, therefore the word sabotage. I don't know if it's true, but it's a good story. You had fears about the printing press spreading heresy. The telegraph was worried, a lot of people were afraid it was going to create unbearable information overload. Telephone is going to end face-to-face communication. And then, of course, smartphones will destroy attention spans. I don't necessarily disagree with that. But if you think about each of these, it's really every one of these was extending physical or communication capabilities. And AI is really, in some cases, a potential substitute for these things. So we are talking about something substantially, a qualitative shift, not just quantitative shift, different. I don't know if anybody was a Calvin and Hobbes fan in the room, but I remember reading these growing up, and Calvin's father would always make him go out and shovel the snow, apropos this week, and of course Calvin was always fighting back, and his father would say it builds character, right? This idea of just go do the hard work and it builds character. Well, the interesting thing, if we look at neuroscience, is he actually was right. Because when we look at really deep inside the brain, we have all of these neurofibrils that transmit information, almost like electronic wires, think about that. And every time you struggle with this idea of desirable difficulty, not knowing the answer, it's attainable, I don't know it, it's not easy, sort of that in the middle, your brain actually creates this myelin sheaths that protect these wires. And over time, they get thicker and thicker. And as they build these sheaths, it moves faster and faster. And so our brain becomes more efficient. And so it truly is this idea of muscle memory that we do need these difficult interactions and encounters in order to create this type of knowledge. And so to quote one of my other favorite, more recent philosophers, we learn who we are partly through what we find difficult, what we persist through, what we give up on, what we find boring, what energizes us. And if AI removes the friction from that intellectual work, then students may never discover their own tolerances, preferences, and capacities. The struggle is where character develops, not just the skills. And of course, that was Gemini. So, we've been working with a number of corporations over the past couple of years to help them train their workforce on all of these AI literacy, AI skills, data skills. And in this process, we've seen what's reflected here with this chart from the World Economic Forum. They produce this Future of Jobs report, and essentially they interview thousands of CEOs from around the world, and they ask them, what skills are you training? What skills are you prioritizing? And by the way, at the end of my talk, I will share a QR code, and you'll have all of these charts and graphs. So if anybody wants those, just be aware that we'll get that to you. So when they ask them about what are the skills that are increasing and decreasing in importance, the ones at the top of the list are the ones that we really focus on. This AI and big data, I don't think that surprises anyone. But notice this concept of technological literacy, or creative thinking and resilience and flexibility. And really these are becoming the most important skills for people to develop. Notice at the same time, at the bottom of that list, my educators covered your ears, reading, writing, and math. So it's something interesting that we'll grapple with here as we think about the education of what are the skills that we should be teaching, in that really that paradox of knowing that if people use AI more and more, they're going to be losing some of those skills, but at the same time, to be competitive in the workforce of tomorrow, you kind of have to learn you have to use those to get there. Now, at the same time, if you look at those organizations talking about what are the skills that are important to us now and what are those that are growing in importance, you see that technological literacy and AI and big data certainly at the top of the list. So let's talk about those for a few minutes. And again, this is really what we focus on. We deliver these in bite-sized learning, so teachers in high school, higher education, as well as corporate settings can deliver these bite-sized chunks of modules that slide into existing lessons. And when we talk about AI literacy, what we're really talking about here is just the ability to understand these technologies, know how they work, understand their applications, their ethical implications, and it empowers everyone really to make informed decisions, use the tools safely, engage critically with AI systems and in their daily workflows. And I think sometimes, one of the challenges we see, particularly in some of our corporate partner settings, they spend so much time talking about how you can't use AI and how it's bad and don't do this and don't do that. They forget to talk about the ways that you can use it. And so people kind of treat it as this thing almost to be afraid of and intimidated by. And those of you that are jumping into AI using it, sometimes the best way to learn is really just to roll up your sleeves and practice with this. So again, in 5 different areas that we look at when we talk about AI literacy, first is just what is it? We talk about ethics and responsible use, practical skills and tool mastery, critical evaluation. Can I trust this model? Is it accurate? Is it usable? And then social impact and communication. How do we think about how this is changing jobs, the workforce, and preparedness? I'll touch on just a couple real quickly here. When we think about model selection, again, going back to some of Epic AI's charts here, I'll show you 3 real quickly. This is one where we're looking at these AI benchmarks on math problems. And if you notice over time, if you go from left to right, what we see is early on, Claude was really great at math, and then ChatGPT comes out with 10304, and then Gemini 3 comes out of nowhere, I shouldn't say nowhere, but recently they've certainly impressed everyone in the last couple of months. And so depending on what type of math you're doing and when you're doing it, the model you were using last month may not be the best model for that job. So just staying in tune and understanding that there are different tools out there to use. If you look at something like unusual machine learning tasks, so this would be something like playing chess. What we saw is ChatGPT comes out strong. Again, Claude, you got Gemini. I'll show you one more just to give you an example. Now this one's interesting. Claude just seems to continue to dominate when it comes to actual coding. And so understanding what are those best models, and then I won't digress too much today, but understanding when to use, if you're in Claude, for example, when to use Sonnet or Haiku or Opus based on the types of programming tasks or daily tasks that you're doing. We also teach ethics, and these are just 1 or 2 slides that I think are fun, perhaps not the meatiest, but certainly something that we need to think about from a societal standpoint. Take a look at these 3 images and decide, if you will, which of these that you like the best. So the one on the left was painted by Vincent van Gogh, and the one in the middle was painted by a lesser-known painter, a Barbizon School painter named Millet. And the one on the right was created by my daughter and I in Midjourney. And the Van Gogh sold recently for about, I think it was $40 million at Christie's. And then the Millet sold for $800,000. And of course, the one on the right is for sale if anyone's interested. Is that okay? Is that ethical? Are we cheating by using Midjourney to create that when clearly it's being inspired by some of these artists? Was it okay for Van Gogh to be inspired by Millet? And where does that fine line start and where does that stop? Now, these are things that they're legal issues, they're ethical issues, they're artistic issues to be considered here. For those of you that may be Impressionist fans, you'll know that the Impressionist school, that 8 or so plus or minus painters that were painting, from Monet to Matisse to Pissarro, essentially the establishment at the time was saying this is not real art. Real art is about biblical stories or history, and what you're doing is just dots and flowers, and like this is sacrilege essentially. And so they lived through some of this existential crisis about whether what they were doing was art. And I think you're going to see modern users of tools like these really debate those same questions. Is what I did art? Probably not. But what about some of these folks that spend hundreds of hours using these same tools to get there? To give you one example, here's a quick 1-minute clip of a song that I've recently enjoyed listening to. You all, I'm sure, heard Creed back in the 90s. There's an artist that is now rethinking these using AI as a soul cover band. So take a quick sample.
At sunrise, I fight to stay asleep, 'cause I don't want to leave the comfort of this place, 'cause there's a hunger, a longing to escape from the life I live when I'm away. So let's go there, let's make our escape. Come on, let's go there. Let's ask, can we slay? Can you take me higher to a place?
I was in the boardroom of a Fortune 500 company 2 weeks ago, and I played that for the C-suite, and one of the chief officers started singing along to the music. So, but at the same time, is that I think that one's actually since been taken off of YouTube due to copyright constraints, but I'll claim educational use here. Obviously, some ethical questions to be had there. Does this count as art? And if we start saying that you can't use AI in art, do we need to go back to the 80s and remove all of the music with synthesizers? So, very interesting ethical conversations that I think are going to continue as we move forward. We'll keep going here. And one of the things is really, when we get back to this idea of AI literacy, is understanding, again, when you can use AI, when you should, when you shouldn't. Where does it make the most sense? This is a chart from McKinsey looking at where do we put, for example, we all talk about generative AI, but maybe we just need a good rules-based system here or an analytical AI system for this. And so identifying what are the different domains and the different applications throughout the enterprise, and we may realize that sometimes you don't need to use a cannon to kill a mosquito. Okay, so when we talk about AI literacy, we've talked about these core ideas. Obviously, we could go a lot deeper in there. We at Quant Hub differentiate a little bit AI literacy from AI fluency. Maybe this is just word games, but we think about more of sort of your mid-tier, 200 level, if you're at a university, 300 level courses. This is things like, you know, iterative prompt improvement, realizing that the first prompt you put in is probably not going to be the best result, but you've got to go through, you've got to work with this. If you're vibe coding or creating an app, there's a really, really good chance that the first thing that you get is not going to work. And so it's how do you use that as a foundation and say, okay, let me go back, let me move through this. And for those of you that haven't vibe coded, I highly recommend it. I mean, it's a lot of fun and it's fascinating. And I will say, once you get something that's working, don't forget to go back, maybe use a new AI agent and say, here's a code for application, help me optimize this, just look for flaws, fundamental issues, and the more you iterate on that, the more positive your outcomes come. Understanding multimodal prompting. And again, for those of you that are new in this space, one of the things that has really accelerated a lot of folks that I work with, their knowledge and comfort with AI, download an AI app to your phone, whether that's, you know, any of the major models. They pretty much all have a multimodal. You can pull out your camera, take a picture of something, and challenge it to do something you don't expect. You know, take a picture of your salad and say, you know, give me a list of everything in it and what's the protein count, or if you've got a plant that's dying, why are these leaves turning brown? You know, take a picture of your refrigerator and say, what can I cook for dinner tonight without having to go to the grocery store? Or maybe your closet and say, you know, do these two items go together? Just challenge it, push it a little bit, and just play around with these things, and don't be afraid to iterate. And I've found everything from, you know, repairing some issue with my car to home improvement to whatever the case may be, and you'll start finding that you actually learn where its edges are. And to that end as well, from a multimodal standpoint, for those of you that haven't tried the voice mode, voice mode really does unlock a new experience because you get away from how fast you can type. You just start thinking out loud. And so the next time you're wondering about something that you want to, we work a lot in educational, higher education. So I was like, what's the difference between an associate and an assistant professor? And how do you normally get tenure? And just going deep into the rabbit hole. So don't be afraid. It's really simple. You just press start talking and just explore some random field. Another thing in AI fluency is context assembly. Understanding that your best answer is not just going to be from a generic chat, but it's going to be, and we talk about RAG, retrieval augmented generation, putting other prior documents or giving it access to your emails, but understanding that the quality of the things that you feed into the AI really does as well impact its output. Task decomposition, understanding what tasks does AI do well, which ones is it kind of not so good at, and then of course building agentic workflows, a big theme of this conference. How do we actually start putting these things together in something that it gets beyond the hype to know this is practically something that we can use it for? And then we also think about AI from a domain and role specific example. And so where we're doing this is really more in the business school. And so we work with a number of universities to provide curriculum that slides into existing courses. We're not the ones saying, hey, you need an AI major or an AI minor. That's great if universities want to do that. But we're saying, what does marketing look like in the age of AI? What does management look like in the age of AI? So this AI in the domain. So if you think about those of you that may have done stuff with web design or any kind of marketing work, search engine optimization. If you walk into, most universities will have like social media marketing as a 300 level course, and they'll teach you how to optimize to be at the top of search engines. Well, many of us know at this point you want to be at the top of a ChatGPT or a Gemini result. So how are the nuances changing in that area? So if you think about AI in the domain, it's really understanding what can AI do in your specific domain. How is it truly changing business processes versus the hype that we're seeing? How are humans and AI working together? We look at context engineering, as I mentioned, the business AI technology landscape. If you're an accountant, what tools are legitimate? What tools are accountants actually using versus which of those are maybe not ready for prime time? And of course, we have the ethical use and applications, critical thinking, and then we go into leading organizational AI adoption as we think about how do we roll this out? How do we get an organization, say thousands or tens of thousands of employees, using this in a meaningful way? And that last one is actually really quite challenging because it's the nuances in many organizations, and I won't count any vendor names here, but they will pick an AI model that is known for enterprise safety, stability, and security. Those aren't always the best models. And so you have sort of this tale of two cities where larger enterprises are using what makes sense from a security standpoint, especially if you're regulated, you're FedRAMP, things like that. On the other hand, you have companies that are 30, 40, 50 people that are free for all, use every model, anything you want to. We don't have any data that we can, we can't afford to lose or whatever. So you got some interesting trends developing if you think about being, the leader or a head of HR or learning and development in one of those two different organizations. Those are going to look very different. Okay, so use case, I'll talk about how we're using it at QuantHub to give you a view behind the scenes. So again, we are a learning platform. I'll give you a quick screenshot or two. This is one of our skills called AI as your learning partner. It teaches students how to use AI as a Socratic partner, things like thought partner, quiz helper, and so forth. And so as students go through here, they're going to get a case study. They're going to get a lesson that they're going to learn about how AI is able to do this particular thing. From here, we'll have quiz questions where we're gonna teach them one lesson. Maybe it's a 10-minute read, something like that. Once we give them that, what we call a key concept, we're gonna stop. We're gonna then say, okay, let me actually give you a quiz question, see if you've got this. These tend to be adaptive, so they change in difficulty based on how the learner is doing. Everything I'm showing you, by the way, is created by AI, and I'll explain how we're doing this and some of the nuances here in a minute. The second part we do, this is in our Applied Generative AI course, we're actually going to give them a simulation where we want to step back and say, okay, we've taught you some stuff. Now let's test your critical thinking skills. Can you get away from the instructions, have an email come in from your boss saying, hey, I need you to do this thing, build this AI bot. You'll see a pseudo prompt here. we tend to teach the fundamental skills without getting deep into the actual vendor selection. And we're going to test the students' knowledge of, how do I optimize this prompt? Are they using the right approach to this particular problem? Again, everything you're seeing is created through AI. And this was really not an easy process. One of the reasons that we committed to this is because we saw back to these exponential curves that I started with, that if the pace of change truly is going to continue accelerating, universities, traditional textbook publishers, they're used to refreshing every 5 to 10 years. But we're going to need to be in a spot where we can do this in 3 to 6 months. And if you think about any education around AI, say you've got a book that was written 2 or 3 years ago, it's starting to feel kind of stale already. And the forward thinkers in AI, Ray Kurzweil, Ethan Mollick, folks like that, they're very cautious and they don't want to use model numbers or capabilities. But we're really getting in this point where the speed of change is accelerating. So we as a team said, if we're going to create curriculum, we've got to do it in such a way that we can scale. And so what we essentially do is create this multi-generative AI curriculum creator on the back end to deliver all of this content. But at the same time, if we're going to deliver it in regulated environments, so we've done some work with the DoD, if we're going to deliver it in accredited environments with higher education or K-12 that you have to map to state standards, you can't just throw it into ChatGPT. Interestingly, AI, one of the things that we've discovered that it does poorly is talk about itself. And the reason is, if you think about all of the hype and all of the different, press reports that are 70% accurate, and then everybody's saying it will be able to do this, and then you take a model that was trained 6 months ago, and it's searching the web trying to find an answer for you. When you ask these bleeding edge technologies, we found that in some cases, while if you want Roman history, 99.9%, whatever. If you ask it like, what can AI do today, the actual quality starts deteriorating pretty substantially. So take a step back. The problem that we were approaching, again, this is a lot different than just saying, hey, ChatGPT, teach me how to make a casserole. If you think about curriculum development, typically you're going to have teams of instructional designers, psychometricians. They're going to plan based on skill requirements, taxonomies, standards. We're going to look at what are the instructional assets we need to create. So this is going to be everything from your articles that I showed you, maybe it's games, manipulatives, activities. Then you have to create, we have 2 different types of assessments, a formative and a summative. A formative assessment really, it's more like a quiz. It actually teaches while testing, whereas the summative is that, okay, let's see if you can take everything you learned and apply it in a real world setting. And then depending on the industry you're in, you've got to validate it. Is this teaching what it says it's going to teach, and is it effective? Is it reliable? Are my tests creating adverse impact? And then from there, you got a beta test, and then some form of deployment. If you're in higher education, you've got to sync with Canvas, Blackboard, Brightspace, K-12, you got Schoology, Google Classroom. If you're in corporate, you've got Workday. So how do you connect all of these things together, create digital credentials, certificates, and badges, and so forth? So while AI can do the core of teaching you a thing, if you want it reliable, if you want it extensible, if you want it something where it can connect to all these systems, build credentials, that's where it really gets complex. And then, of course, everything we just did, we got to do it over again in 6 months or a year because we're betting we'll have to throw it out. So the industry, at least from our perspective, is going to grapple with this question of how do we go from a 3 to 5 year refresh cycle to a 3 to 5 month cycle. And we've seen pretty much by and large, to create 1 hour of content that you put in front of a learner, you're going to spend about 200 hours of instructional design time actually creating that curriculum to deliver that. At QuantHub, we've been able to get that down to about 10 to 20, and so we're seeing about a 20x increase in our speed to market. It's easy and quick to deliver text-based instruction. Where it gets harder is when you want to start doing more video, games, and things like that. So behind the scenes, what we did is we've created these agents. Again, I know you'll have a lot of hands-on workshops in the summit, so you'll be learning how to do some of these things. But we essentially created, instructional design agents, psychometrician agents, beta testers, researchers, and so forth. And so in our system, we can call these agents to do highly specialized tasks. And what we do, this is the first version, one of the early versions. You can see this is actually in Cursor. Here we're calling an agent called the architect agent. Really thinking of this as a assembly line. What if we have one agent do one part and then pass it along to the next agent? and then stop. And we know it tends to fail at this, so have a human validate this, and then take it to the next step, and then so forth. So here's an example of running through the more recent version of the curriculum builder where we're doing our AI for space exploration. Again, we can load all of the, actually let me walk you through what this looks like. So we say, well, okay, I want to create a new course. Well, what do you want to teach in that course, and how long do you want to teach it? So we define our goals, and we put that into the system. Maybe we upload past lectures if we're doing it for, say, a university. Maybe it's an article or books or any kind of IP. From there, it creates a curriculum plan. The curriculum plan is that scaffold that says, here's what we're going to teach. Learning outcomes, those key concepts. This is what we want your learner to walk away with. Now, this is really important because it allows us to go back and map to standards and make sure that whether it's our customer or our students or whoever are aligned with, yes, we're teaching what we said that we're going to teach. And so at this point, it's a great place to stop, hand this to an industry expert and say, did we get it right? Very often, no. And the reason is because AI averages the internet. And so the problem is that you want better than average. If you're paying to go to a good university, you want really good. So how do you go from that 70% right, 80% right, to that 99.9%? So we'll have the subject matter expert validate that curriculum. Again, in the case of higher ed, we will basically pay faculty to be professional reviewers from different universities, review the curriculum plan, and then we go through that system, and all of those different agents will create the articles. Once we have the articles, then you can create the quizzes based on the articles, and you can scaffold and structure all of that together. We then have the SMEs validated again, and then we deliver it either through our platform or through a third-party platform. So one example is we're partnering with Emory University. In a couple of months, they will be launching AI in healthcare. This is for chief medical officers that want to understand how to really run a medical organization, thinking about the AI implications in radiology and patient tracking and things like that. And so in this case, their chief AI officer is that subject matter expert. We take prior work from him, put it in the system, he validates it, and then we launch it with this partner. So a couple of the considerations that we had to work through, again, as I mentioned, accreditation, accessibility issues, your rights compliance, IT audits, how do we get this secure? So there's really a lot that goes into it beyond just sort of your casual ChatGPT interface. Again, I'll share a QR code at the end with all of the slides, but if anyone wants an example, on the left is one of the curriculum plans that it's created that we've delivered, and on the right you can see an actual lesson. That lesson is teaching Excel. I think it's like some ifs, and so you can see it actually creates interactive in the article. Oh, did I get this right? Can I type in this cell? So it's pretty fascinating to see how far this has come. Our newest versions we're using, I bet many of you have played around with Google's Notebook LM. If you haven't, it's a really cool way to create podcasts where it's more interesting to listen to. So we've got an API where we're now creating podcasts for our articles, so the new ones we're creating. And pretty soon, I imagine, we'll do video as well. Okay, a couple of final thoughts, and then I'm happy to turn it over to questions and answers. A couple of things that we've learned. Treat agents like interns, okay? Don't expect too much, start small. Assume that you can't just give it to them and what you get back is ready to use. You wouldn't do that with an intern, don't do it with an agent. And expect some of that frequent iteration. And if you give them bad data, of course, you're going to get bad results. If you're vague, then you're going to get random results. So a lot of it just goes into realizing this is not some super agent AGI that's going to solve my problems for me. Like, how can I get this semi-dumb intern to do this one thing? Like, and if you can just do that, if we can tweak it, we iterate, then we can go into something else, do this next thing, maybe a better agent, maybe we're connecting different agents together. I mentioned AI isn't good at talking about itself. Students need to develop their own evaluation capabilities. We talked about this earlier with really building those muscle memories. You need to understand, is the AI giving me something that's right or wrong? And if you skip that process, then you basically lose the ability to evaluate. And I tell people, at the point that you can no longer tell AI whether it's right or wrong, you have been replaced by AI. So despite the successes, I don't know the exact numbers, but I'm seeing reports of as much as 95% of AI pilots failing in these larger enterprise environments. There are a lot of negative reports coming out about the true upside and things like that. And I would suggest that really one of the challenges that we've seen firsthand is it's not just the fundamental capability of the generative AI, but it's the infrastructure that's surrounding it. It's the context that's surrounding it. It's the change management, the human side of the equation that really must be thought through and put into place. We're seeing a lot of demo reels. If you get on YouTube, Instagram, whatever, everybody, as soon as they do something cool, they post it and, hey, look at this. Sometimes it's airbrushed, sometimes it's heavily edited. I'm not saying these things aren't happening, but keep in mind what you're seeing is the absolute best of, and sometimes there's this imposter syndrome. I've seen this a lot in corporate offices when I present to C-suites. They'll ask me, hey, what are our peers doing? What are our neighbors? Because they all ask. And they're all intimidated and like, we're last, I feel like we're behind, we're gonna do everything we can to get ahead. And there's sort of this universal sense of, oh, those guys are doing something really cool. And let's be honest, a lot of times it's the PR and marketing departments that are doing cool things and taking some artistic liberties that may or may not be fully where we're there yet. So again, not to diminish the capabilities, but I think we all just need to realize the true reality of where we're sitting right now. And I do think that we're going to start seeing more and more agentic governance platforms become a more thing. From a data science perspective, really for the last couple of decades, data governance has been one of the most critical yet underappreciated aspects of a corporate environment. As data scientists 10 years ago, we're building really cool predictive models, but then you realize, oh, wait a minute, we trained these on bad data, so nobody trusts the data. Just because you turbocharge that process doesn't necessarily mean you work out all of the issues. Yes, AI is great at identifying connections and patterns and things like that in unstructured data, but you're still going to have this as an issue. And some interesting things about agents creating other agents is certainly something to watch. We're seeing this really just in the last couple of months where you can actually have, instead of just one agent doing something like coding, more and more agents doing this multiplicative work. So I'll close by looking at this slide just one last time. Again, there are really a lot of fascinating priorities emerging around analytical thinking, curiosity, lifelong learning. So as you all think about what skills do I need to have and develop really as we move into the future, yeah, you need to learn prompt engineering, AI systems and things like that, but continuing to learn things like leadership and social influence and really begin to focus on some of the human side of the equation, I think is going to serve you really well. Okay, again, anybody who wants a copy of our slides, I would encourage you to download them. We have a great internship program. We've placed about 70 interns, high school, college, across the state in AI and data science jobs. You can get some more info from us there. Also, Dr. Kelsey Bickett is in the room somewhere. Where is Kelsey? Right here. If you want to learn about our internship program, certainly see her. I'll stick around for a bit as well. If you have a school that you want this in, definitely we'd love to talk to you about that as well. So really appreciate your time and happy to hang out for a bit and answer some questions and dig deeper.
All right, we've got about 20 minutes for questions if needed.
Any questions at all?
Thanks, great talk. I'm just the first. I'm sure there's going to be 25 minutes of questions. I'm an industry professional that also does some part-time graduate instruction. And the school that I'm in has sort of resisted AI until last semester. And then it was like, we're all in, including things like all classes are going to be asynchronous now. Come and go as you please. And I feel, maybe this isn't recorded, so it's probably good to get your answer. Is like, feel like it's a race to the bottom of we're going to let the machines do this interaction rather than the humans. And you touched on this 3 or 4 times in your talk, so I kind of feel you have a strong opinion about this.
I do. Again, it goes back to Socrates. What are the skills that we need to learn? How are those changing? There's often this fear that, hey, once this next thing happens, it's all over. going back to these skills that we need to learn. So you touched on a couple of things that I think are certainly live wires. Higher education, are we going to need it in 5 years? Right? We get that question a lot. And if you think about a lot of these skills that I'm telling you are becoming even more and more critical, they're the exact kind of things that higher education is traditionally great at teaching, leadership and social skills and creative thinking and development. Higher ed at the same time is an industry, just like any other industry, and so to imagine that no universities are going to close anytime soon would be short-sighted as well. Bad businesses go out of business. Bad universities will essentially go out of business as well. So if you have an entire university, especially those that are down the rankings list that can't sell just by the power of their brand, I mean, let's face it, Harvard's not going out of business anytime soon. But if you've got, say, 5 letters in your school name, acronym or something like that, you're going to have to be creative in the next couple of years to think about how do we stay relevant, how do we stay competitive. And the challenge is traditionally they've had 5 years to figure that out, 10 years to figure that out. And I joke they want to, when they talk about AI, it's like, okay, we're going to start a committee, and that committee will form a committee to think about what we're going to do. And we don't have that time. And so the universities, the institutions that don't move at a faster pace, I think really are going to struggle. And I think you are going to see that shift. But I would say it's a free market struggle that we're also working with a number of institutions that are like, no, we're putting AI everywhere. Every class has to start thinking about how we bring this up to speed. But at the same time, how do we flip the classroom? How do we focus on those human skills, those people skills? How do we help our students? And so that's one of the things that we've positioned Quant Hub as, okay, we're going to help with the AI side, because even schools where we have an AI expert teaching, and they'll say, hey, I got this, I'm going to create all the AI curriculum. They'll call us back in 6 months. They're going to say, whoa, I didn't know I was going to have to do this every 6 months. Okay, yeah, we'll just use your stuff, and then I'll teach on top of that. And so I would say there's a great opportunity for that symbiotic relationship. And obviously, we encourage universities to think through those soft skills as an emerging priority. Anybody else?
I'm going to show my age with this one. But if I think back to when they introduced calculators, and all it had was plus, minus, multiplication, division, and then the square root, and that we encouraged our students, no, you can't use your calculator. You have to have the little, if you want to have the formulas, you write on a little index card. Y'all remember this? Anybody? Mm-hmm. And then, we advanced, and now there's the acceptance of the calculator, the engineering calculator in the schools and everything. And then there was the internet. And, oh my God, they're cheating by whatever. And then there's the turnitin.com, and then there's that. Do you foresee, I've heard the struggles. I teach or have taught multiple times at different universities, and I see the struggles of the professors where they're like, do you go ahead and allow them to use AI in writing their thing? Do you go ahead and check the 5 words in common and have it searched through? And what is going to be the tipping point that gets us past that limitation to go ahead and accept we're in a world of AI, and we're going to have to use it, and lots of people are going to have great grammar and not have errors in their writing because of AI. So what's the tipping point? I'm sure y'all are seeing that discussion going on right now.
We are. So you hit on a couple of things I'll touch on. I have no connection or animosity towards Turnitin, but I do worry about universities that use plagiarism detectors. If you look at the data, in many cases, they're detecting the complexity of the vocabulary used. So it disproportionately mistreats speakers of English as a second language who may not have the same richness of vocabulary. There's a lot of reasons that even if it were, and whenever I've tried to use it, it didn't work. It said I was a robot, and my wife says the same thing, so I can appreciate that, but it's, I worry about academic discipline based on models that are not, so I'm not a big fan of those. If you put yourself in the shoes of the faculty, I do think, and I know many technologists or tech-forward thinking folks in the room, obviously, we do have to be empathetic in the sense that if your career for the last 20 or 30 years has, on one hand, maybe it's been research, and you're really good, and you're, you know, the big man on campus because of all your articles being published and all that stuff, and people come along and say, oh, I can do that in 5 minutes now. That's not very warm and fuzzy, whether you believe it or not. So there's this existential question there. But at the same time, if you think about semester in and semester out, as a public speaker, I don't want to sit here and redo a 50-slide deck every, I'm giving a talk tomorrow. Chances are I'm going to use a lot of the same slides. I don't have time to do that. And so if you think about, faculty and you tell them, I know you're comfortable with all these classes you've been teaching your slides and which jokes the students will laugh at and that sort of thing. You got to redo all of that, and now you need to redo that, spring, summer, and fall. That's a scary proposition. So just naturally, even those with a big heart and say, I want to believe this is the thing. There are a lot of natural resistance that occurs. We are seeing really over the last 18 to 24 months, faculty are starting to come on board and starting to realize. And one of the things that I do to sort of push them out into the deeper waters, like I said earlier, just download it to your phone, do something that helps you personally, the multimodal things. And I think the more people realize it'll help them make a better casserole or whatever, I think they start to open up to, oh, I bet I could use this to create my syllabus, and maybe I can just replace some of those repetitive, redundant things. And so I would say that's really the entry point, is talking to faculty, saying, what are some of those things that you just as soon not do? What are some of those redundant things? What would you do if you had the Iron Man suit, so to speak? Okay, you're a researcher. I get now this thing that took months now takes days. What new drugs could be discovered? What new planets could be explored now that you can move so much faster in some of these areas? So I think a lot of those things are gonna converge to create a tipping point. I think a lagging indicator will be student surveys. Many people agree that if your faculty are telling students that they can't use AI in a field where it's highly relevant, they're doing the student a disservice, and the students will increasingly see that. They'll start seeing that on their faculty feedback forms. But I was talking to some deans yesterday at a conference, and one of them laughed. He said, 90% of our faculty is on board. The other 10% basically say, look, buddy, I've outlasted 5 deans before you, and I'll outlast you. So there is going to be some of that mentality. When we saw the meaningful use with when Obama was in administration in healthcare, where you have to use electronic records or face penalties, there were a lot of doctors near the end of their career that just said, fine, I'm just going to retire. I'm not going to go through that cycle. So I think you will have some of that, and at the same time, you may have some new folks enter the educational field that get excited about the realm of the possible. In the back there? So it goes back to this slide right here. I absolutely agree with you. If you don't do certain things, if you outsource your thinking to AI, then you'll never really develop those core capabilities. So you made a comment about the calculator. My teacher told me when I was growing up, you had to learn these, divide, long division, whatnot, because you're not going to be walking around with a calculator in your pocket. Well, I actually am walking around with a calculator in my pocket. But fundamentally, that changes, that sort of goes to this philosophical question of what are the skills that maybe we can offload and be okay. Another one that comes to mind is navigation. Anybody here lived through the MapQuest era and the TomTom? Like, if you take a wrong turn, you're done. You're just toast. And with GPS today, what we do is we have now offloaded our navigational abilities, kind of to your point, where we're no longer thinking spatially, I need to turn left here, turn right here. You're talking and listening to music and doing whatever the GPS tells you. And so we are eroding some of these abilities. So some of those abilities, I would suggest it's probably okay at a foundational level to allow to erode, just because technology will replace the need to do some of the things that we just, for all intents and purposes, unless you're maybe in the military, you probably don't need to navigate the highways and the interstates outside of just using a GPS. Yes, there are edge cases where you don't have internet or whatever, but maybe you take that brain power and the time you would have spent there and look at applying to new and future things. Parallel to this concern, though, is the apprenticeship problem that enterprises are all facing. And that is, if we have kids, or, they come out of college and do the grunt work, but now the grunt work is being done by AI, they're not going to learn enough to become management because they don't know how to master that domain. So you are seeing this perspective shift from a pyramid to more of this diamond shape. And we're saying, well, how do we solve this? And this has certainly been a question I've been grappling with as well. One of the things, and again, not to diminish the importance of the question that you ask, it is one that I don't think we all have answers to yet. But as we're navigating through this, last night I was reading about companies doing more and more simulations. Okay, so they're not going to get those reps their freshman year, in the university, or excuse me, in the corporate world. Can we use more and more simulations in different areas? So at our team, our sales force, we've actually built personas of different faculty that we're presenting to. So we do deep dive on who the person is we're selling to, what their buyer needs and requirements are. We then combine that with our sales battle card, our brochures, all of our competitive analysis, and then we put that into a custom agent, and our sales team sits in front of that agent and says, okay, pitch me. The sales rep goes through that. They respond, and then the agent tells them why that's a good response, what they missed. They can film like a Zoom video, record that, upload that to the agent. The agent can critique their presentation. And so simulations are one of the ways that I think you'll see in the coming years. I think it's a business opportunity as well when you think about some of these fields like legal and accounting, where this is a massive, not a minor problem, this is a massive problem. So thinking through simulations, and I do think it is a question we need to have in our mind. How do we be careful that we don't miss building those muscle memory opportunities? It goes back to the faculty. No, you shouldn't forbid AI in your classroom, but at the same time, you should be very cognizant of what are those foundational skills that you do need to build this muscle memory. And I would suggest to you that if faculty will have that conversation with students, in many cases, they're just avoiding it, and they're not even writing an AI policy. They're just, it's a wild west. But if you'll have that conversation, I want you to use AI here. You cannot use AI here. Here is why I need you to do this. 95% of your students will appreciate that. 5%, they're going to cheat anyway. So, it is what it is. Thank you. Any other questions?
All right. If there are no other questions, thank you, Josh, for all of your insight and applications.